E nessa última sessão hoje do dia aqui do nosso palco, a gente vai falar sobre além das regulações.
Welcome back. We're going to talk about beyond the regulation and open ecosystem and how data economy can drive your business forward. So for this panel, I'd like to call the Latam Director for Sensedia, Mr. Alexandre Gomes. Ale, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. This presentation will be done in Spanish, just so we leave our trademark in APIX as well. And for that, we're going to invite our experts. The first one I'd like to invite is Gabriel Santos, Executive President at Colombia Fintech.
Muy bien. Tenemos también a Daniel Marin.
Daniel Marin, Director of Open Finance at ADL Digital Lab. And lastly, to finish our team of experts, Mr. Carlos Hoyos, who is a specialist at financial services for AWS Latam. All right. The topic that we're going to discuss today, we have discussed it throughout the event, but the idea is to present a perspective of going beyond the data economy, going beyond the regulation and open ecosystem. So what can we do and what we expect from the future regarding these topics that we see today in Latin America? Because countries are at different stages of developing open finance and open banking initiatives. So, but this, of course, doesn't stop us from thinking and understanding the importance of these topics for the region. So to introduce these topics, we're going to talk first a little bit about the interoperability, financial inclusion, and new business models. These 3 points are very important because when we talk about interoperability inside the same industry, we are talking about how companies or how banks will need to operate their businesses in a connected way inside the financial sector. And the same thing goes for insurance companies when we talk about open insurance or even open health, how the health companies will have to work together and have this interoperability inside the sector. And at the same time we talk about interoperability, we see that we have a new business context, that we see already happening in several countries. So the cost of channels helps financial services to reach different segments in society that traditional channels do not reach. So this is a good reason for us to understand that we will be in touch with other segments of society, which brings the opportunity of creating new business models different from the traditional ones. So we're going to discuss these topics here today. Thank you very much to our experts who are here to help us with this question. So let's start with the questions. We're going to start with Gabriel. So, Gabriel, talking a little bit about financial inclusion, let's start with that. How do you see, or how can interoperability and the new business contexts that are being created, how can we include or how can we reach more financial inclusion through digital businesses? Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. To start answering your question, I would like to present a context on the financial industry in Colombia. Colombia is a country that's very similar to other countries in Latin America, but it comes with the level of informality. Our population is usually divided 50-50 that changes, but our population, so a big part of Colombians live in working in informal jobs. So we don't know about their income, and they are not present in the traditional banking system or in fintechs. On the other side, when it comes to financial inclusion, we have a very positive indication. 93% of people older than 18 in Colombia own a financial product. But if we look behind the numbers, we see that the number of products go down to 60% incomes to use. And if you think credit, that goes to 30%. So if we combine the high level of informal jobs with people who have access to credit, we have a large number of population who don't have access to a financial product that has been so widely transformed as credit. But Colombia, similar to other countries in the region, is changing because we have started two important discussions, which is the topic of interoperability for payments, like Brazil did for PIX. I think the golden standard for PIX is spreading throughout the region. The Colombian Central Bank today is working in developing a similar system, but the government, through the National Development Plan, has made it mandatory to have this open banking. So as soon as we create credit, we're going to have the opportunity to have some transactions visible for the first time, and that change will take us to 30% of credit. People having access to credit to perhaps more than double. For example, payment for telephone services. Colombia decided to go from open banking, open finance, and start with open data. So we will be able to visualize these transactions. This is one example. We have many others. So we can include these people who have informal jobs, but who pay for a mobile phone service. They work in an informal job, but they pay for transportation services in Colombia. And with that, we could include them as the base of the financial sector in Colombia. So we are about to include millions of Colombians. So that means that there is a business opportunity that Colombia has never experienced before, because we are a large ecosystem and we are about to include millions of Colombians in our financial system. So this is what's happening with this new business wave. We need to have the insurance system ready for people who have never bought an insurance. We need to learn how to issue credit for people who work in formal job. We have never been ready to do that as a country, but from the fintechs that I represent and the more traditional sector, we are preparing to offer these people products that they can pay for without, of course, falling into debt, and can be accessed in different regions of Colombia, even the more remote areas.
That's very interesting. There's a lot of room to grow. We have to create the right context in order to get to these people. Daniel, how would you like to comment about that? Well, just adding on what he said regarding the context, which is very broad, there are two concepts that are very important: the financial inclusion and financial education. So I think it's important to find sense, not only to include just for including it per se, or to increase credit to increase the wallet, but it has to be done that in a responsible way. So I do not want a customer that will go into debt and that they will, default. So this is the big job that we have to do, since, accessing data, how to build or refine the credit models that we already have, so that we are able to give credit in a responsible way, and that data of customers are actually able to offer them a better quality of life. We also see the need of accessing other types of data that are not only from the financial sector, because those that are not that are not in the financial system have other types of information, and that allows you to assess the credit risk in a safer way, and that provides more safety for the financial operations because regarding scalability. Let me give you a little bit more of the context. At the Digital Lab, we represent the organization of Luis Carlos Olo that represents the banking service, the gas and energy and communication industry. So that allows us to see how customers behave, what is their purchasing behavior, the flow of money resources. And with that, we're able to refine the credit models, including what we do with digital wallets. Right, so you already have a lot of experience operating the financial system with the population of Colombia. So that experience is very important. From the technical side, I would like to ask Carlos a specific question. Since we're talking about financial inclusion and cheaper channels to interact with a public that in general does not have access to traditional banks, does technology reduce those costs so that we're able to work with that sector? Absolutely. Can you hear me well? Before answering your question, I would like to comment a little bit on what the others just said. So in Colombia, we have a specific issue for inclusion, which is education, but also connectivity. Connectivity is a key point for our rural side of the country. Today, there's no quality in the connectivity and internet connections, and that, makes strategies more difficult. So this is an issue that goes, from creating public policies to improve connectivity in the country. Another important point related also to what we have heard is open data. Or this concept helps if we find use cases that meet the demands of the daily lives. In fact, Gabriel mentioned that Colombia is a country that has 70% of people in the banking system. But they are also thinking about, ATMs, People use a lot of cash for transactions. So in order to reach the population and to understand that the use of technology is better for them than using cash, that's going to be a little bit more complex. But regarding your question, there's no doubt. Companies today have an important value, which is the behavior of data. So when companies start to understand that value that they own and how they're able to monetize on that through different strategies and how to leverage it with machine learning and AI and other types of technology that support new business models, then these companies are going to find a lot of opportunity to grow, for sure. But that has to be connected to a business strategy linked to a strategic need from the customer. Excellent perspective. That's very, very interesting. All right, so moving on. When we talk about interoperability among sectors, when banks have access to insurance data, for example, or communication data, we see that the regulation of open banking working on banks, for example, to create a safe context. But the regulation is not only useful to define boundaries for companies, but also to offer them a safe context in operations. When we're talking about a huge volume of transactions, it might be actually a risk for the financial sector of a country if there's actually no regulation, right? So the regulation exists to provide this peace of mind for safe operations in the financial sector. The same goes for insurance and other sectors. All of that, has to do with regulation and personal data protection. It doesn't matter if it's in the financial sector. My account with the telecom company is a personal data, right? No one has to have access to that. But if I'm able to offer my consent so that the telecom company can forward my financial information so that the bank is able to assess my credit, if I had never had a financial statement, for example, that would give me some opportunity to have a better financial history. So this transversal exchange of information is important. How do you see that as a trend, or is this type of data not available to interact? Are there any trends that you see? I would like to hear from Gabriel. What do you think about those trends? So we're talking about interoperability. Well, I think that Colombia has a specific context because they have a previous data protection law, but we do not start from the release of data. There is a good level of data protection, and the construction of open data is more transparent in the text, depending on the consent of the customer. So these are important guidelines that we already have, but there are also challenges. We have a department that monitors the public services and the banking services and everything else. So who's going to govern this universe of data sharing to monitor, really, and check if all rules and regulations are being complied with between, a company from the financial sector and a public company? That we do not have an answer for that. So which department or institution is going to govern this type of data sharing? So this will be the first stage, this first pillar, considering the regulations that we already have from the finance department. So how long does the consent last, for example? Because this was the first law that started to advance in discussions. So right now, we are a little bit uncertain. So as a country, we have to ask if we do have to create a new entity to regulate that type of activity, because we do not have anything to protect the users so far. Or are we going to delegate to an existing institution to monitor the data protection law? That has to be based on consent, on the ability of being able to revoke that consent, on the side of the user, and to generate benefits based on those data that we had never had access before. What about you, Daniel? How do you see the obstacles to overcome the overcome the situation and have interoperability? Well, I think the first step to that is the ability that we have as a sector to protect customer data. Today, we were talking about translating to the customers what for a technical area is a fact or it's easy. I just, tell the customers that their data is safe and protected. So when the customer information is safe, then I can think about interoperability, and I could divide it in 3 parts. So how am I going to be interoperable within my group? 1.0, how am I going to do that with financial informations or financial institutions? But if I want to have interoperability with telecom companies or retail companies, then would need other protocols from the technical side. Those would be the big challenges that we have. But if we do not have any guarantee on information protection, then the customers will not provide their consent and we will have obstacles. And if we do not have open data, then we're not able to explore the potential of those initiatives. If we talk about open banking, then finance will be explored. But if we go to other areas, we would be able to explore that potential in a global level. Right, so Carlos, how do you see that from the technology point of view? Well, I would add a 4.0 interoperability among regions, like the Pacific Alliance. You know, you've already seen some interest there. So, you know, there's a reality where the exchange of information between companies is not something new. There were different mechanisms of information exchange and mass processes, like the swap processes where we shared information. Now we're talking about a top-jab model. Before, those rules for information exchange between two parties was defined by these two parties. Today, we're talking about something different. How do we define a data dictionary today that anyone can understand and be able to communicate with me? So the interoperability between different sectors is a huge challenge. It's something that we aim at, but we have to see the materialization of the business decisions as something that matters. And we have to take that into consideration because we have to start doing it on the first stage and doing it well, because at the end of the day, interoperability is going to happen when the end consumer acquires the benefits of this interoperability. If the end consumer does not see any benefits in the product or the service, it's going to be a complex model. But there are two industries that are very regulated in the world: healthcare and finance. So, of course, you are able to advance in the finance industry, and that will create different insights that will reach other sectors. But we have to be clear about a different dictionary for each sector, and each and every one of them will have to solve that interoperability among themselves before scaling. Oh, that's interesting. So from the technology point of view, it's totally feasible. But the thing is the complexity and the regulation behind that. So we have to deal with that in a specific way, and the differences between countries and the different stages of each country. Some will have advanced scenarios and others will be lagging behind, and that will impact businesses in each country and among the sectors. Right, so before the next question, the important element is the willingness of the companies to be interoperable. We might have a technology platform or a regulation, but if there's no willingness from the customer, we won't be able to have interoperability as we expect. So we have to go beyond that, beyond the technical abilities. We have to understand how we're going to lead those operations. I think that an open world with a macro trend that it's called the border illusion of frontiers. So that specifies that I, as a user, expect to get from an industry an experience that is even better of what I'm getting at a different industry. So as countries advance in that experience and you start to promote this experience to the customers, we will be able to generate an organic pressure in countries to start that transformation as well. So industries and sectors also have to, leave a position from lagging behind to advance and be able to get to the same integration ability and ability to working with open data that other more advanced industries have. So the countries might have, advanced regulations and might be able to deal with open finance. But also, the more traditional companies will have some difficulties to advance, right? So that's very interesting. Right, so in summary, we have an interesting concept here. We have interoperability 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. So at the end, I understood that with 1.0, we have the interoperability of companies in the same sector, like open banking, just like we saw. Then 2.0 is among different sectors, the data interoperability, open data, and 3.0 would be among different countries. A type of interoperability that needs certain standards, certain types of integration, something that is already happening in 1.0, but we also see a regional integration among countries. So that would be the highest level that we could reach with interoperability and the benefits that that would provide to businesses and to a whole segment of the society that does not have access to services. And it might be other services from other sectors, not only financial, that, sometimes the market does not reach some sort of segment of the society. So that would be an interesting approach. All right, so the last theme or the last question has to do with the technological enablers for interoperability to, allow for that to be safe and scalable. This is already proven. We have been seeing this in Brazil, in the United Kingdom. So open banking did not provide APIs. Companies already interacted. They were already integrated before open banking. And APIs were actually a technological architecture that enabled that security to be available with interactions. So how do you see APIs as these commercial assets? We talk about that all the time, but we understand that once a bank starts to operate in a digital channel within an ecosystem, it is also creating value for the bank. So that's an additional channel that generates new revenue. So these are new streams of revenue, and that generates a new status of value for the market. So in a scenario of financial innovation, APIs are not only a technological tool, but to become actors for financial institutions. So how do we create an ecosystem to allow to have open data in the context of values of the market, so that for companies that use these technologies?
Well, I think that with this new mercantilization or enabling APIs to be treated in this way, we have a new reality of competition between industries. For example, to belong in the financial sector in Colombia today, because of regulation issues and because of protection of the country, traditional banks, they have some obligations, and to comply with them, there is a level of restriction that we as fintechs don't have. So for this ability for resource training, it's difficult for the banks to get to certain segments of the population through this conversation on APIs. So fintechs are not necessarily a competitor to traditional banks, but they can be the first segment to commercialize banking services. They could be the channel for better customer acquisition without having to have the level of cost and complexity that banks in Colombia have in order to work with certain levels of population. And I think this is a transformation in the financial sector that through competition we'll be able to access poorer segments of society to offer more services and work in this pyramid to improve access to credit. So having access to more vulnerable population through faster mechanisms as they report their new habits and improve their credit score, so they can access traditional banks to access more capital then. So it becomes, of course, a new possibility, but we also have challenges in terms of who can access the system because of the criticality of the system that they are assessing. There's a systemic risk. We all have obligations to the state. We need to comply with the security standards and minimal standards. So all new players comply with. And of course, that could exclude some players with less resources. So we need to find a way to come up with mechanisms that are generous enough in terms of the API patterns. So we are not fighting against innovation, but at the same time, they need to be strict enough to avoid risks. All right. Operational risk in the financial system, even with all the technology enabling it, we always should keep an eye on that. And speaking of a company with many banks, one of the largest groups in Colombia, how do you see the topics of APIs in traditional institutions? Because your mission is to bring that to them, right, Daniel? How do you see that? I believe that initially we have been working in an evolution process, not only how we can think about financial products and not only as a credit card for a bank product, but how a bank can help me enable a business or facilitate my income. So APIs, they can be part of all parts of the company. So the developers, the business area, and so on and so forth. So we have to share this concept of API first, going beyond technology and sharing it to other business areas. So this is one of the first important components. After that is how we see API as a product, which is a topic that we have been discussing here. So it's a product. We have to think about the basic concepts of a product. And different products require different strategies. We have an API that would require a pricing strategy. So where I'm going to sell it, how it's going to be called, and all the components that are necessary when you think about a marketing strategy for a product. So first, API first, and then we have this open mindset throughout the organization and how I can design a product, and think about it for the open world. You were talking about traditional banks and how they are updating their legacy systems. But without this open mindset, certainly the legacy is only going to grow. So from this moment until we are updated, from this point on, we're going to work with this open mindset, and everything we do now will be used, that will be developed and can be used by other competitors and for the industry as well. So it is a large group with many businesses, many clients, but it's almost like dividing the company into, it's difficult, right? And Carlos, you from AWS, you have big companies, small companies as clients. How do you see APIs in the two different segments? One thing that's important to mention is that APIs The word that I use to define APIs is democratization. So you democratize knowledge. It's no longer product, it's no longer service. At AWS, for 16, 17 years, we have done everything that has to do with infrastructure, analytic models, and artificial intelligence. And we have enabled all these services through these models. So everyone here today using AWS services, every click you make, this platform has an API. And that's how you democratize access to services. Just to mention a few numbers, 87% of unicorns in Latin America today are based on AWS, and 91% from unicorn companies in Brazil run on AWS. And they do it because they have found in AWS a platform that through the exposition of API-based services has enabled them with a technology that perhaps 10, 15 years ago would be very difficult to access and would require large investment to do it. Now, answering your question specifically, APIs enable these models. Banking as a service estimates that around $2 trillion is the size of the business opportunity until 2028 with a 26% growth. And embedded finance, according to the analysis that they have done, say that this could reach $7 trillion. And this is basically because of the democratization of services and products that the same companies could also use. So the opportunity is really immense. All right, thank you very much. Thank you for your participation. A lot of great content. I'm sure it was extremely valuable for everyone to hear about this perspective for the future. We have learned a lot, but as a summary, it's important to understand that interoperability is a way to allow open data to become a reality, not only in each individual industry, but also between industries and between countries. This can also be a way to integrate data between countries. So, all right. I think there was a great discussion. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for everyone who was watching. I believe this was an excellent topic. We focused a lot on Latin America, Colombia specifically, that has advanced a lot on the topics of open finance and the financial sector in general. So thank you very much for coming and thank you for your time. I'll speak in Portuguese and Spanish. We have to open the room, so please make sure you gather your belongings and just, I'm going to ask you to leave the room so we arrange the room. Just repeating the same thing, but in Portuguese now.